Hey, good morning, everyone. So, yeah, this is a pretty big talk, so I'm just going to kind of just dive in, plow through. It's my third party, and I will cry if I want to. And I warn you, I might actually cry, because this is 45 minutes covering the dangers, the perils, the absolute minefield that is third-party performance. I'm willing to bet that anyone in here who's ever worked on even the smallest of websites will have used one, if not a handful, of third parties, mainly because of convenience. We might not want to build our own analytics package. We might not want to do our own image transforms. We might not have the knowledge to provide a comment system that Discuss might give us. So out of convenience and usually cost saving, we will use a third party, but then we begin to relinquish quite a lot of control by taking the convenience sort of route. We have to start giving something back, and usually that is relinquishing control and accepting some risk. Before I get into the talk proper, I just want to come back to this. This is my third time in Toronto now, and I just find this city absolutely wonderful. I haven't really spent enough time here, despite having visited 3 times. But I think this is really true. I really adore the tech scene here. I think it's a really sort of like, it's a great thirst, a great appetite. And nothing sort of proves that to me quite like this that I saw on my way here this morning. Website. Just the word, not a question, it's not a question. Website, yes. It's just the word website. Notice a distinct lack of web address, just a vague, physical, kind of, I'm here for the website, I think. So yeah, keep flying that flag, Toronto. Has anyone else seen this? They're stapled to the lamppost all around the building. Anyway, yeah, I'm Harry. I won't sort of do much of an intro because you don't really need one. I'm a consultant performance engineer. It's my job to help my clients like these. I've had a really very fortunate career, usually quite big clients because they feel the benefits of performance the most, helping people like this have faster websites. Nearly every single person on this, or organization on this slide has had some kind of performance slowdown, and I'd say more than half of them have suffered third-party performance degradation. Now, when I was researching a talk about third-party performance, my mind immediately went back about 10 years, honestly, it's as long as that, to a news story from Australia. And the reason I was reminded of this news story is, well, it has 3 similar sort of themes with my talk. It deals with parties, uninvited guests, and also financial repercussions.
Teenager holds an alcohol-fueled party for hundreds of kids while his unsuspecting parents are on holiday. 16-year-old Corey Worthington is now facing not only the wrath of mum and dad, but a $20,000 fine from police. I spoke to him a short time ago. Corey, thanks for joining us. The only question that I can think to ask is, what were you thinking?
I wasn't really.
Did your parents say you could have a party?
No.
So,
I didn't.
Why did you?
I don't know, it was just a get-together with a couple mates at first, and then we thought we might as well just have a bit of a party, and then it sort of just got out of hand, and yeah.
I fucking hate that guy. I hate that guy so much. But that last sentence, it kind of got out of hand. I mean, one, understatement of the century, it cost his parents 20 grand. But then it reminded me of something else. This made me realize that, yeah, it got out of hand. I mean, pretty severely, but most of the performance issues we get on the web are just things getting out of hand, people losing sight of things, losing track of things. Nobody on purpose builds a slow website. No marketing teams on purpose overload the front end with tags and scripts and third parties to make a slow website. Usually people just lose track of things. A client got in touch with me last year saying, hey, we've got some kind of performance issues and I believe they may be down to third parties. And I was like, send it over, nothing scares me, I've seen it all. I ran some tests, web page test, you've probably never heard of it. Ran some tests, and this one did scare me. I thought I'd seen it all. This was something a bit different. So the green is what the client, the developers, believed they had built. What was getting sent to customers was a little more like this. Oh, get comfortable. And then this made me think, actually, the biggest problem with third-party performance is usually a disconnect. Because it is true, the green is what the web developer had built. It's what the team had built. That's what they spent their day working on. But as soon as this site goes live, it's a very different beast. Normally, your production environment is very, very different to your development environment. And that's usually because it's not until you're in live that your tag manager kicks in, your ad networks are used, your analytics, your RUM data is being collected. Developers very rarely interface with the actual live version of a website. They get a nice, fast, local version that doesn't have all this stuff loaded into it. What happened here is a tag manager simply ran amok, and the sort of, I guess, the marketing team or whoever is responsible for that tag manager didn't really know how far was too far. Now, can I have an honest show of hands? Who is not really familiar with what a tag manager is? Just be honest. If there's a few people, I'll do a quick intro. That's enough hands that I'll give a quick intro to tag managers. Picture the scenario. You're a front-end developer, and your manager or your client asks you, hey, can you put Google Analytics on the site? So you copy and paste the snippet, and that's fine. A few days later, they're like, hey, can you install this little A/B testing tool on the site? And you say, well, I can, but I'm kind of busy right now. I'll put it on the backlog, and I'll get around to it. And the marketing team get a bit frustrated. Yeah, this shouldn't take so long. So somebody, in their infinite wisdom, invented something called a tag manager. So now what happens is the marketing team asks you, hey, can you put Google Tag Manager or Adobe Tag Manager on the site? And that's just one small innocuous JavaScript file. But that JavaScript file is a conduit, which goes to like an admin interface somewhere, a GUI that someone logs into. And they can put whatever they want in the site through the tag manager. So if they want to put a Facebook tracking pixel, sure enough, they can go to the Facebook developer docs, copy and paste the JavaScript, put it in a tag manager. So this is all production JavaScript. It's not production quality JavaScript, oh no, but it's going to production completely circumventing the development process. Developers don't see this happening. Now, it could be something like the Facebook tracking pixel, it could be Google Analytics. It could also be your marketing team Googled something, found a 13-year-old forum post, and was like, oh, I'll take that, that should work. It could be anything at all, and it largely skipped the dev process, which is usually why I get a phone call to come and fix this. So anyway, this talk is huge, so I'm going to try and whiz through 4 key areas. First, understand. What risks do third parties pose? Secondly, auditing. How do we measure that risk? Thirdly, how do we discuss that risk? How do we bring that up with third-party providers and our own internal teams? This is probably the most difficult part of the whole process because it involves emotions and people. And finally, mitigation. How can we design around it? How can we safeguard this? So understand. There are many different ways in which a third party could affect our performance or affect us negatively in general. And I'm going to start with the one that I know least about, just to get over and done with. Security. I'm not a security engineer. I know very little about security, but it's a huge sort of aspect of third parties because you're inviting someone onto your page, right? You're inviting someone onto your site. And largely, it's just down to trust. I trust that Google Font isn't going to all of a sudden one day start sending me crypto mining stuff, right? It's trust. So make sure you always pull things from secure origins. It's a small one, but if you're getting mixed content warnings, that's going to erode consumer trust. You're not going to put your credit card details into a site if Chrome is saying, hey, this site is insecure. It's just a good idea. Always pull things from a secure origin. Anything that is coming from an insecure origin is susceptible to a potential man-in-the-middle attack. That third party could be tampered with. It could be compromised in some way. Some man-in-the-middle attacks can be friendly, so like Google's data saver proxy service, for example, if you're on an insecure connection, they could re-optimize your images for you. But still, insecure content is prone to these kind of problems. And bad actors could run amok. There could just be a scumbaggy third party. It's absolutely possible that a third party is not a good actor. We said right at the beginning, well, in the last talk, sorry, about using airplane Wi-Fi. Now, I can't believe we can fly. So having like internet up there, I always buy the Wi-Fi. I always buy the Wi-Fi. I can't get my head around it. Last year, or maybe the year before, I was flying to, I look really creepy there, just staring over DevTools at you all. I was flying to Iceland, and this is a transitional period where you could optionally visit my site via either a secure or an insecure connection. Iceland Air were man-in-the-middling me, advertising to me. Annoyingly, I deleted most of the ads from this screenshot to make it look tidier. Then I realized that it was actually way more impactful when you could see across the top. It had a big thing saying, book your, kind of buy your food, get a drink for free, whatever, loads of ads, man-in-the-middling me. But the main performance concern I've got is this. If you look at the protocol column, they're downgrading me. Their proxy service is downgrading me to an H1.0 connection. Switching this to a secure connection immediately put me through Cloudflare's H2 much, much faster. A couple of years ago, YouTube got busted, and this is true, serving crypto mining ads to customers. YouTube was recently caught displaying ads that covertly leech off visitors' CPUs and electricity in order to generate digital currency on behalf of anonymous attackers. So there is a chance that the person you've trusted, YouTube, they might be hosting ads that are run by someone who isn't quite so nice, and they're rinsing you for CPU cycles to try and make crypto. So at a minimum, pull everything from secure origins. Make sure your third parties always send you secure responses. And this has like a knock-on performance effect. TLS Everywhere gives you access to web platform features that you wouldn't normally be able to have otherwise. We're looking at things like H2 Service Worker and broadly performance-oriented features which are only available to secure connections. The next risk we've got is delays. It doesn't take me to tell a room full of performance engineers that delays are bad. Time is money. These delays could come in a few different guises. We could have, on the network, we could just have slowdowns. We could have a high latency connection between a first and third party origin. Third party infrastructure could be suffering an outage, or it could be getting DDoSed, for example. And then there's the often overlooked aspect of runtime cost. By runtime, we could be talking JavaScript, or we could be talking really badly optimized images. So whatever lands on the device may not be optimal either. This is me quoting a friend of mine, client called Ryan. He's the CTO of an e-commerce startup. And this is him quoting a discussion he had with a third-party provider. So this is a third-party provider with whom they spend thousands of pounds a year. And they were worried that this third-party provider was running slowly, so they got on a phone call with them. The third-party provider naively responded, "Oh, there is zero performance overhead to using our synchronous script. Our typical response time is around 200 milliseconds. Well, pick one. Is it 0 or is it 200 milliseconds, right? Can't be both. 200 milliseconds is an eon. It's such a long time when we talk about performance optimization. A client of mine, Trainline from the UK, they worked out if they could reduce latency by 300 milliseconds, they could see an uptick in £8.1 million worth of customer spend a year. So proportionately, 200 milliseconds would be worth 5.4 mil to this company. Mobify found that for a 100 millisecond decrease, they saw a 1% increase in conversion. So 200 milliseconds converts to, or equates to, over $750,000 a year. Not as impressive as 5.4, but you wouldn't turn your nose up at $750,000, right? This is my favorite. This is staggering. Walmart found for every 100 millisecond improvement in performance, it led to an up to 1% improvement in revenue. I did a bit of crude maths, right? I just Googled some stuff, and Walmart's 2017 e-commerce only revenues were so high that a 2%, 200 millisecond increase in revenue would equate to an extra $230 million increased revenue a year. So that 200 milliseconds doesn't seem so innocuous anymore. Let's go one worse. What happens if there isn't a slowdown? What happens if there's a full-on outage on a third-party origin? It leads to a single point of failure. I've witnessed this happen for real, sort of in real time with clients of mine while I've been in their office. Worst case scenario, what happens when a third party goes down completely? I want to show you something that actually happened to a client of mine. There's a company called Sky in the UK, big broadcaster. Notice the address bar. I've made a secure connection to sky.com. I've connected to that origin. Look at the title tab. It just says the web address, right? No text in the title tab. If we look down here, we've got a pending script. It's just going to say pending for the next 1.3 minutes. What's happened is, I'll view source, and at some point I'm going to make the text a little larger. We've got a synchronous third-party script on a different origin that is currently suffering an outage. The parser is stuck on line 9, and it cannot progress to line 11, where the title tag lives. That's why we can't show the user anything in the title bar, because the parser is stuck on a synchronous third-party script. Tiny, tiny little user-facing optimization. Put your title tag above all your third-party assets in your head, just so we can avoid this. You'll see 100% of the HTML payload has arrived. We should be showing content to users immediately. We're not. This third-party outage is having a severe impact on this client. What's going to happen is after a while, Chrome's built-in timeout is going to fire. It's around 80 seconds, 1.3 minutes. I don't believe there is any kind of like spec as to how long each browser or platform should wait before it times out. Chrome seems fairly consistent at 1.3 minutes. I actually made my client sit through this video. Here we go, 1.3 minute DOM content, 1.3 minute load. But for that entire 1.3 minutes, we showed the customer nothing at all. Not even a title in the address bar, right? Really severe. This problem isn't unique to Adobe Tag Manager. It's not unique to this client of mine. This is just behavior, the web or browsers. This is expected behavior. If you link to fonts.googleapis.com, as most of us probably do, you stand to suffer the exact same fate if they have an outage. A synchronous third-party blocking asset, if it has an outage, can lead to severe load times. So I was on site with a different client while this was happening to them, and global average load times went up to 100 seconds. Because they had a synchronous third-party script that was currently having an outage. Had an outage for 2 days. So we obviously just pulled it and just, didn't have that third-party script for 2 days. That's huge, right? 2-day outage. We need to audit this stuff. We need to find out what's going on and feed it back to people. So I've got a very rigorous, very sort of formulaic, repetitive almost, approach to performance auditing. I'm going to share some of the things I do when it comes to specific third-party audits. And the very first thing I will do is just get a very, very broad strokes idea of the general impact of third parties across the entire site. If you've got your phone handy, take a picture of the next slide. It's one of my favorite little tools. We're going to be using Request Map. The slides are online already, so you don't need to worry too much, but if you want to get an early sort of preview, this is a really great tool. We will loop back to this in a second. I'm going to take you on a bit of a departure that is very specific to my workflow. Whenever I work with a client, the very first thing I will do is just run loads of tests. So I'll go off and fire a bunch of web page tests from the relevant contexts, browsers, geographic locales, connection speeds, etc. Just going to grab the ID of the first test that I run. I'll plug that into Request Map. This is a bit long-winded. You don't have to do it this way, but it'll make sense shortly. Plug it into Request Map, and then we get this that my clients and I have lovingly dubbed the jellyfish. Now, this is a really great bit of data viz for marketing teams, and that always sounds really patronizing, but what I mean by that is it's really good for non-technical folk to get a rough idea of what's going on. The size of each blob represents the amount of bytes, or kilobytes, or heaven forbid, megabytes from each origin. The distance between the blobs represents the mean time to first byte, or the latency between those origins, and the thickness of the lines between the blobs represents the number of requests between those origins. Now, we're engineers, right? We want data. So this is great for sort of data viz, but we want the raw data, which is handy because right here we can download the CSV. It gives us this little sort of spreadsheet format. Don't laugh at me, I don't write much awk. I don't think anyone does. But I cobbled this little one-liner together. So once you've downloaded that CSV, copy and paste this from the slides, run this from your command line. This will just extract every third-party domain from that CSV file. It will just give you a plain text list every third-party domain. Then what we can do is go back to web page test, and what I tend to do is just block all of them to start with. I'll just paste all of those origins into this lovely little advanced settings block feature. This prevents web page test from dispatching requests to any of these origins. This is very heavy-handed. What I'm doing here is saying get rid of all third parties, but what you tend to do is think, I think that moat ads is particularly troublesome, so I will just block that one. But I do a really broad strokes, block them all, see what happens. This gives me a good idea of, do we need to have a conversation about third parties at all? Is there actually a problem? This is CNN's website, and everybody always uses CNN in performance talks. They should by now have the fastest website in the world, but they don't. So here you can see load time is quite severely impacted by third parties. This means if we've got any first-party things waiting for the load event, perhaps a lazy loader for our images, that event's not going to happen because it's been pushed back quite severely by third parties. Quite optimistically, though, we can see that start render and speed index aren't too adversely affected. So we can kind of roughly proxy the fact that we aren't blocking rendering for third-party content, or certainly not severely. However, if we look at metrics like number of requests, requests went up by 4.2 times here, a factor of 4.2. Now, over H2 and multiple origins, number of requests is becoming less of an issue. But on low-powered devices, negotiating and opening so many TCP connections is going to drain battery. It's just generally not great. If we look at data transfer, we'll see that page weight was increased by a factor of 2.7 when we had all third parties enabled. It doesn't really affect us in this room, but as of 2015, so semi-recent study, 20% of British people still use a pay-as-you-go data plan. They pay for every single megabyte they download. Paying for stuff that is probably just tracking them around the internet and showing them ads for things they're not interested in is, to me, somewhat immoral. I landed yesterday in Pearson and turned my phone on, and I didn't realize that I don't actually have data roaming in Canada with one of my particular SIM cards. So I got a notification saying, hey, you've used 80% of your allowance, and it's about to start costing you £6 per megabyte. This page is 2.7 times more expensive than it should be for me. Stuff like this is somewhat immoral, and this is why I completely understand people using ad blockers and stuff like that. Anyway, this is very extreme, very non-scientific, but this gives me a good grounding. This allows me to work out how much of an issue third parties might be for my particular client. Going a bit more forensic, we need to look at slow origins. A really good question to ask is, what happens if typekit is running slowly? What happens if Optimizely is running slowly? Really good question to ask, very simple to answer. There's a tool called Charles Proxy. Anybody used Charles before? Quite a few of us, that's great. Charles is free in the same way that Sublime Text is free, if you know what I mean. But I would totally recommend grabbing a copy of Charles. It's really, really powerful. It's a network proxy, right? But I don't use it for proxying stuff. I tend to use it for its throttling feature. We've got very crude, very coarse throttling available to us in Chrome's DevTools. One of my favorite little articles is actually by Pat about better quality throttling, and Chrome's DevTools is quite coarse. So using something that sits closer to the network, such as WinShaper for a Windows machine, or Network Link Conditioner for a Mac, or Charles across all platforms, much better, more accurate network sort of throttling. And what I like about Charles is we can enable it only for specific hosts. This means that we can just slow down my CDN, or I could just slow down my tag manager and see what happens then. Let's go one further. What happens if one of these third parties isn't running slowly? What happens if it's gone completely? So yeah, what happens if Adobe Tag Manager is having an outage? What happens if Google Fonts is having an outage? Again, thanks to Pat, we've got access to Web Page Test's black hole server. I'm not sure if that IP address is current. Is that correct currently? Yeah, cool. Right, so yeah, that's probably a good idea. So don't scribble this down just yet. I'll need to update these slides if it's different. But basically, this simulates an outage. Any traffic that goes through this server just kind of disappears. It simulates full-on outages. This is actually how I simulated this test, this screenshot. Interestingly enough, Google Fonts, they don't have an SLA. So I was working with a really big client, and part of their core business is customers' ability to use custom fonts, and they're all provided through Google Fonts. So I asked the engineers, okay, what's your mitigation sort of like strategy? What happens if they go down? What's your SLA with Google Fonts? Because as far as I'm aware, Google Fonts don't provide an SLA. And my client was like, what's an SLA? Oh, shit, this is severe. SLA, service level agreement, what happens if Google Fonts goes down? Turns out nothing. They don't owe you a penny. They don't owe you an apology. Google Fonts is a free service, and it's a great service, but if you're hinging your entire business around them, and they go down, they're going to give you 1.3-minute load times, and they don't owe you a single apology for that. Actually, you can't get historical uptime information. There isn't a status.googlefonts.com address you can visit. So I actually reached out to somebody at Google Fonts just to get some information. Interestingly enough, since the service was launched, they have not had a single millisecond of downtime. So statistically, Google Fonts is an incredibly safe service, but if anything was to happen, this is what the knock-on effect would be for your customers. I need to hurry up. Missing files. So we've looked at network delays and outages. What happens if the file's missing or corrupt when it arrives? What happens if there's a fragility in your code base or your front end that means that missing files are kind of, I don't know, potentially troublesome? Jake Archibald said, and I completely agree with him, he said a few years ago, all of your users are non.js users while they are downloading your JavaScript. In every page load lifecycle, every single visitor is for a brief period, hopefully a brief period, a non-JavaScript user. Until that JavaScript has been downloaded successfully, executed successfully, everyone's a non.js user. Semi-controversial opinion of mine is I don't believe we should optimize for the non.js use case. Anyone who turned JavaScript off knew what they were getting into. My defense of this sort of, it's not too controversial nowadays, but I'm willing to bet that your site has more IE6 users than it has non-JS users. And your IE6 strategy is probably, no. So it would be weird to optimize for a smaller percentage of your customer base who've got JavaScript disabled than it would be to optimize for, say, IE6. That doesn't mean you should just go sort of willy-nilly gung-ho and not care at all. I think we should optimize for the use case, or at least build for the use case of what happens if that JavaScript fails. Can it fail reliably? Can it fail safely? Anecdotal, but this is a really interesting and, to me, because I'm a nerd, quite amusing story. A few years ago, there was a massive problem across the internet where T-Mobile's proxy servers, so most telcos will proxy the data you're consuming through their own servers and make optimizations for you. They will look at an image and maybe recompress it and pass it on. They will check to see if text assets have been compressed, and if not, they will compress them and pass them on. Now, T-Mobile's proxy server was a bit overzealous with its comment stripping. It popped open jQuery and thought, oh, there's a massive comment right in the middle of jQuery. It found a slash and a star, started deleting. Problem is, it wasn't a comment, it was a regular expression. It was a slash star in a string, and it never found the corresponding closing comment. So they basically just trimmed off 2/3 of jQuery. Yeah, great, jQuery is 2/3, a third of the size it was, but it's not very functional. And it broke the web for hundreds of thousands of people for several days because they were just overzealously stripping stuff out. Side note, TLS everywhere prevents this. They can't proxy if you're running a secure connection, so another sort of +1 for TLS everywhere. Client of mine built an entirely client-rendered JavaScript application. I've got an entire talk about that that I could just give, probably over a few beers. Fully client-rendered JavaScript application, and they hadn't considered the use case. What if something goes wrong? What if the JavaScript has a fatal error? What if something goes wrong? Modern tooling makes it dead simple to work out how you can recover from this. Right-click on the asset in question, block request URL. Subsequent page refreshers will not request that asset. So you can find out what happens if your main bundle is missing or malformed. My client just showed an infinite loading spinner. Not great. We should have done some defensive programming to say, unless we've successfully booted the application, give a warning that says, hey, something has gone wrong, really sorry, bit embarrassing, but refresh the page. Do something better than this. I really don't know if I've got time, but I'm going to indulge myself. I was working with a client last year, and they're pretty big in Canada. They're based in England, but they're pretty big in Canada, video streaming, reality TV service. Again, fully client-rendered JavaScript application. We did some performance changes and rolled a release, but somehow a package, a small JavaScript dependency, got version bumped, and the version bump happened to have a pretty severe error. A date object was getting returned as a string only in, as a fatal error only in specific flavors of iOS. So it's a very small subset of users, but those users took to Twitter, right? They just start tweeting, oh, your service is terrible, it doesn't work on my phone. This one small error in a third-party sort of dependency was fatal enough that the entire application completely failed to load on certain flavors of iOS. We hadn't designed around the fact that what if that happens? I think the last thing in terms of auditing is looking at runtime cost. How expensive is this stuff when it arrives? To get a good proxy or a good sort of handle on this, again, quite coarse information, but a really good starting point. Open the page you're interested in, run a performance profile, and in the bottom you're going to find the summary panel. In the summary panel is a small sub-panel called bottom up, and then select group by domain. Basically, it gives you this view. This tells you which domains are, or which attributable domains are the most expensive in terms of runtime cost for this particular page. This is a client-rendered React application, so it completely, to me, makes sense that the first-party JavaScript is the most expensive. So I'm feeling quite safe here. I'm thinking, good, you know what, we are the most expensive origin, that makes sense. However, if we were to swap this from group by domain to group by URL, something pretty surprising happens. Google Tag Manager has more runtime cost than the core React library. Something very severe is coming out of Tag Manager. This particular one file is of interest to us now. What I like about this view is it updates in real time as you kind of scrub. If you look at the graph up here, you can see my cursor's moving. It updates in real time. And what I'll do is I'll restart this and just try and point out, yeah. While the page is initializing, Google Tag Manager took #1 spot. Somehow we're giving more CPU cycles to third-party content ahead of first-party. The learning here is let's defer the third parties, make sure we've dealt with first-party stuff first, do third-party after. Right, discussion. This is, I hinted at before, probably the most difficult part of the entire process because technical problems have technical solutions. But you can't rock up to your marketing team and tell them, hey, everything you do every single day makes this site fractionally worse. It's not going to wash, right? It's not going to get you many friends, it's not going to be very productive, and it's what I'm hired to do. I have those conversations because my clients, like the engineering team, don't want to. So I've worked some kind of strategies into my workflow which take the edge off telling someone that their job is basically worthless. It's a joke, marketing teams aren't worthless, that was a joke. Nearly every time, every client will tell me some flavor of this. Oh, they're a necessary evil. We don't want to use it, but we have to. I think this is lazy. This is the height of laziness, because it just sweeps the problem under the carpet. It's their way of saying, don't want to talk about it. Thing is, it's nowhere near as black and white as that. It's very artsy, that, isn't it? Black and white. We need to actually dissect what we mean when we say necessary and evil. Some things could be both. They could be neither. Google Fonts, absolutely not necessary. We can make a functional website without a custom font, but definitely not evil. Crypto mining software, not necessary, not for the customer at least, and it's definitely evil. So we need to actually be a little more sort of, self-critical, I guess, or self-aware, and actually drill down what we mean when we talk about necessary evils. Once we've started to identify things, the easiest people to discuss with, do you want to get a picture of that? One of the easiest people to talk about or sort of discuss this with is going to be the third-party vendor. It's their job to provide resilient, reliable code for us. So it's quite easy to have those discussions because it's their responsibility. However, vendors can sometimes be a bit of a black box. You might not always have direct line in. If it's a third party with whom, oh no, sorry, skipping ahead of myself. Advice for discussing issues with third parties is form a hypothesis. You will have an inkling, you'll have an idea that a particular third party is slow, and you're probably correct. But point 2 is critical. Gather the data. Make triple sure that you're correct. Nothing more embarrassing than ringing someone saying, yeah, you're shit, and they tell you that, no, you've just implemented it wrong, right? Triple check that you are correct. Triple check that they are the problem. And once you've got that data, replicable, repeatable, demonstrable data, let them know. Now, this is the difficult bit, because unless you spend a lot of money with that third party, you might not have a direct line in. It might be a case of opening support tickets or checking out community forums if it's something like Google Analytics. If it's a CDN or like an image transform service, and you spend maybe tens of thousands a month with that company, there's every chance there's someone you can call up. There's every chance there'll be an account manager who will actually help you triage and assess and fix these problems. I do this in my work quite a lot. I'll notice performance degradations in sort of libs that my clients are using, so I'll just go and submit performance patches. I'll just do the work myself, feed it back in that way. And if all else fails, step 4, send them a tweet. People panic when it's on Twitter. If it's a support thing, it just goes into a support queue. If someone's tweeting about it, people listen. It sounds very tongue-in-cheek and it does sound a bit trite, but I would consider this as a genuine strategy. My ad provider, I've got a little ad in the sidebar on my site. By all accounts, a really nice company. I've used them for years. I sent them a tweet. Hey, can you just stick rel equals no opener alongside your target blanks? It's good for performance, good for security. 6 weeks later, it was live, done, right? Just because I asked. DHL, shipping company, they were running an application, but they weren't forcing it over a secure connection. HTTPS was there, it was available, they just weren't forcing their customers there, and they were taking customer data. Pinged them a tweet, hey, can you force this onto a secure connection? About 2 weeks later, done. Load time, right? So I've got no idea who this is. Your third parties have their own third parties, and typically, we refer to these as 4th, 5th, 6th parties. Load time was a 4th party on my site. I don't know who they are, but they were being called by one of my third parties. Tweeted at them saying, hey, can you force this over a secure connection? Their CTO got in touch. Perfect, if you can panic the CTO, nailed it. Fixed in no time. One thing I will say, and I'll need to point this out before anyone else does, this little blue tick does help. But my point is this, just start somewhere. Saying something is way better than saying nothing at all. Just give it a go, fire them a tweet. Do it in good faith, try and offer the solution if you know what the solution is, but starting somewhere is better than doing nothing at all. Okay, the tough one, the difficult bit is discussing this stuff with internal teams. Actually going to a marketing department and saying, look, I get your job is to do this stuff. We need to measure things. There is absolutely value in having RUM data, analytics data, right? There's definitely value in having some third parties. So we can't just go in and remove them all. We need to have a bit of a discussion about understanding what they are. One of the techniques I use most frequently is I go back to the little jellyfish from earlier, and that CSV file that we downloaded. I've built a little Google Sheets template into which you can import that CSV data, and it will just categorize and sort of highlight problem areas. The Google Sheet is a template that is freely available. There's a big link to it in a couple of slides' time. This is my site. Very few third parties on my site. Anything yellow is a duplicate. This can tell you, oh, we've got 5 ad networks. We've got 3 analytics packages. Anything red is a degree of severity in a sort of a gradiated fashion. So white is completely nothing to panic about at all. And the darker red, the worse it is until it's solid red, and that's your worst 90th percentile. So here's where you'd start focusing your attentions. This is an oddly specific thing I'm about to show you next, but if you want to use this template, you will need to memorize or at least refer to the slides for this bit. When you drop your own data in here, you have to do it in a specific manner. So the CSV file we got from the jellyfish thing, file, import, navigate to that CSV file, and here's the important bit. Replace data at selected cell. So when you replicate this yourselves, make sure you refer to this slide. Replacing data at selected cell ensures that the conditional formatting sits on top of your new data. If you were to just pop it into a brand new sheet in that spreadsheet, it would just be numbers. It wouldn't look like anything. So CNN, we will see, looks more like this. We can start to see that we've got allegedly only one tag manager, but more than one A/B testing tool, more than one affiliate marketing sort of platform. There's a really important column in here that's currently empty, column H, notes. This is what I will do when I sort of work with marketing teams and sort of like whoever that may be in the business. I'll go and ask them stuff. The key point sort of in the workflow right here is ask, don't tell. Don't rock up saying, look how scary this spreadsheet is, I'm deleting everything on Monday. Go and say to them, hey, can you just tell me, why do we use this? What third parties do we use? Can you explain the relevance of this one, for example? So yeah, arrange a meeting, gather the data, organize a meeting. I know we don't like meetings, but it's important. Ask questions, get insights. There is a reason why your company needs a tag manager, because they want to do stuff. Maybe you can help them do it better. Maybe you can help them do it faster. Work out what problems they're trying to solve and see if you can solve it in a neater first-party fashion. Or you might know of a different third party that is maybe cheaper or better, or it's thought about performance. So to find out what they're trying to solve, help them achieve it. Bunch of questions here. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but the last one is quite interesting. Are there any services in here that we don't recognize? There's always at least one. Oh yeah, never heard of that one. Right, well, we've got an account for it. No one knows what it is. Let's bin it. Let's get rid of it. I'm going to tell you another story because I'm treating myself, I guess. I was working with a client last year, and they had a third party, and I was a bit sneaky about this. I'd put in their little engineering Slack channel, hey, can we get rid of this third party? And the product owner was like, absolutely not, definitely not, can't get rid of that. We spend a lot of money on that. We need that, so we can't get rid of that. And I was like, are you sure we can't get rid of it? I'd like to get rid of it. He's like, absolutely not, no questions, we cannot get rid of it. And that's when I decided to tell them, it's never worked. When you copied and pasted the embed code out of Outlook, it converted your straight programmer quotes into curly quotes, which meant that this has literally never worked. It's a syntax error. This file has never once been downloaded. This third party has never once functioned on your site. I did a git log and sort of followed the history of this snippet all the way back to the day it was installed. It had never once in 3 years been functional. They'd been paying for it. God knows what they thought it was doing, because it wasn't giving them anything. But no, we can't get rid of that. So we already did by accident 3 years ago, so it's gone. So yeah, if you want to take a picture of this, feel free. This is a link to that Google Sheet, that template. The slides are already online, like I say, so don't panic too much. But yeah, start dropping your own data over the top of this. You'll get lots of nice information. Well, with 5 minutes to go, we need to do the whole fourth section of the talk. Mitigate. How do we design around this? How do we build resiliently? How do we build defensively? First bit of advice, simplest bit of advice, Self-host. Self-host as much stuff as you can. I'm working with a client at the moment, and their immediate optimization, even before we signed any paperwork to work together, I just sent them an email saying, get all of your stuff off of these third-party CDNs. Don't link to JS Deliver or whatever it is. Don't use Mac CDN's Bootstrap. Bring all of this stuff onto first parties. It's going to solve so many problems. It's going to make your site a lot more resilient and a lot faster. So self-host as much as you can. Even if it is a third-party asset hosted on a first-party origin, that still counts as self-hosting. Self-host as much as you can. It means you've got the controlled infrastructure. If you've got an outage, you've got your own outage to worry about. If you're running fine and your tag manager's having an outage, that's when the frustration sets in. You get reduced network negotiation, no opening new connections, etc. You can dictate your own caching strategy, and you can use things like preload to preload things that you know you will need. So where possible, self-host any critical assets. Not always going to be possible, but anything that is on the critical path, anything that blocks rendering, always try and get that onto your own origin. Load anything asynchronously. So any asynchronous loading method that a third party provides, use that, right? And if they don't provide an asynchronous loading method, that's a red flag. For me, that is a warning that they haven't fully considered the impact of if they have an outage. An example with Sky, the tag manager, it might not always work because you probably will get sort of race conditions and sort of syntax errors, but the fix for this was just make it asynchronous. Just load your tag manager asynchronously. Yeah, your tag manager is for tracking users, right, or maybe retargeting them or whatever it is. If your tag manager goes offline and blocks the site for 1.3 minutes, you've got nothing to measure anyway. Always load things like this asynchronously. Don't block the primary purpose because there's no point in measuring it when it's broken. Resource hints, so we can use resource hints like pre-connect to actually mitigate a lot of the, or sort of pay up front for the network negotiation costs. So we can use pre-connect to do things like, well, what I'd recommend is just take a look at a typical page on your site, identify third-party providers, get a list of origins, a list of domains, and pre-connect them. What this will do is it will deal with that network negotiation ahead of time. My site before this is years old, but my site before I implemented pre-connect, all of this expensive network negotiation is happening very, very just in time. This is the least opportune time to deal with this stuff. Switching over to pre-connecting these origins, we can sort of swallow that cost much sooner and off of the critical path, or at least take it out of the way of, well, these are third parties, so that's not critical path, but swallow that cost sooner. Word of warning though, don't go crazy with this. Don't warm up every single thing. Don't warm up fourth parties. Only warm up things you know are going to be important to the page, frequently used, etc. 1 minute, 42 seconds to look at CSP. Anybody using CSP in production? Content security policy. Relatively new. CSP 1 is quite mature, actually. What this does, it's a header that defines what kinds of content different origins can load. So what you can do here is say, the only third party that is allowed to use run JavaScript is Google Analytics. This means that Google Fonts isn't going to start sending you JavaScript for some reason. This allows you to whitelist domains and what content they can send to you. If they send a JavaScript file but they haven't been whitelisted for JavaScript, it'll just error, right? Console will give you a warning, it'll say this hasn't worked, it violates CSP. CSP1, pretty mature. I tried implementing it on my site, and even with a handful of third parties, it becomes really hard to pin down what are legitimate sort of good actors and bad actors. Where CSP defines what kind of content can be loaded, it doesn't actually define what that content can do. So you might whitelist the domain and say, yeah, send over some JavaScript for analytics. But what if they get compromised and all of a sudden it's mining crypto, or it's tracking people's geolocation? A new spec feature policy fills that gap, and it allows you to pinpoint or sort of whitelist what features are available. Every site should have this by default. No one's using my microphone, no one's using my camera, no one's using geolocation, we don't need it, you're not auto-playing anything. So feature policy allows us to actually pin down what those assets can do after they've arrived. It's in its infancy, I guess, so can't be used that much, but keep an eye on it, it's a pretty interesting policy. Sub-resource integrity, SRI allows you to actually verify the file you've requested is the one you expected. It looks like this, you get an integrity attribute. This is a SHA-256 sort of checksum of the file, which is then passed through base64. What will happen is when the file arrives, the browser will check the checksum against the file that actually arrived. This means that if some little script kiddie hacked jQuery, the CDN, and put something malicious in there, this file changed, you know for a fact that something's gone on, and the browser will refuse to execute this asset. SRI is pretty good. It's pretty decent support, so yeah, start using it. A lot of responsible third parties will give you an SRI token anyway. Last thing, I promise, I'm now 42 seconds over. Unprofessional. Priority hints, relatively new spec. Priority hints allow us to give a little more information to the browser and say, hey, look, these ads are of low importance. They're a script, which traditionally, well, this would be high or medium priority, depending on where it is in the page, because it's a synchronous script. But what we can actually say is importance equals low. We could say it's ads. They're not that important to the page. I'd rather load first-party content. This, again, is in its infancy. I believe it's still behind a flag in Chrome, but priority hints is absolutely something to keep an eye on. And the last tip, which is the worst one, it's such a cop-out, it's so lazy of me, you're going to hate me for this, it's just restraint. Just get by with as little as possible for as long as possible. That's probably the most meaningful way of avoiding third-party issues. Don't install a second tag manager, right? Don't install a third font provider. Try and get by with as little as possible for as long as possible, and that renders the previous 46 minutes kind of completely obsolete, right? So if you can get away with as little as possible for as long as possible, that's absolutely what I would recommend. You've been very patient, very gracious. That's me shutting up now, saying thank you. I'm around for the rest of the day, so if anyone does have questions, come and grab me. But thank you for listening.